My father's credit card was my oxygen, until the day he cut the line and left me in a neighborhood I wasn't even allowed to drive through. I used to think the world was made of glass, shiny, expensive, and completely transparent. Growing up as Ilara Vance meant that no was a word used for other people. My father didn't just have money, he had the kind of wealth that silenced rooms. I didn't walk, I glided on marble. I didn't study, I curated my social life. My biggest struggle at 22 was deciding which vintage Chanel bag went better with a sunset in Santorini. My friends were like me, golden children of the elite. We laughed at the idea of a career. Why would you build a ladder when you already owned the penthouse? Ilara, you should learn the business, my father would say over breakfasts that cost more than a teacher's monthly salary. I'd just laugh, swirling my mimosa. Why, Dad? You're doing such a great job. Besides, stress gives you wrinkles. I thought I was untouchable. I thought the safety net was infinite. I didn't realize that the higher you are, the harder the wind blows when the net is cut. It happened on a Tuesday. I had just returned from a shopping spree in Milan. The house was deathly quiet. No staff in the hallway, no music, just the ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer. My father was sitting in the library. The lights dimmed. He wasn't holding a glass of scotch like usual. He was holding a single crumpled envelope. "Sit down, Ilara," he said. His voice wasn't angry, it was cold. That was worse. "Dad, if this is about the credit card bill from Italy, I can explain." "It's not about the bill," he interrupted. He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw something in his eyes that terrified me. It was pity. "It's about the fact that if I died tonight, you wouldn't know how to feed yourself by tomorrow morning." I rolled my eyes, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Don't be dramatic. I'd just hire someone." "With what?" he whispered. "The accounts are being frozen, Ilara. Effective tomorrow." The room spun. "What? Is the company in trouble? Are we bankrupt?" He didn't answer. He just stood up, placed a single key on the mahogany table, and walked out. "Pack a bag. One bag. Only the essentials. We leave at 5 a.m. I didn't sleep. I stayed up, wondering if we were fleeing the country. Were we losing the mansion? Was this a joke? I packed my most expensive jewelry, thinking I could sell it if things got bad. I was so incredibly naive. At 5 a.m., the sun hadn't even thought about rising. My father drove me away from our estate, but we didn't head toward the airport. We headed toward the city, the part of the city the GPS usually told me to avoid. The tall glass skyscrapers faded into gray, low-slung concrete. The neon signs were flickering or broken. The air smelled of exhaust and stale grease. "Where are we?" I asked, clutching my Prada tote. "Reality," he said. He stopped the car in front of a massive, rusted warehouse. Men and women were lined up outside, shivering in the morning mist, holding thermoses. Their clothes were stained, their faces etched with fatigue I had never seen before. "Get out," my father said. "Dad, I'm scared. What are we doing here?" He handed me a plain gray jumpsuit. "You start today. You're not Ilara Vance here. You're employee 402. You will report to a woman named Beatrice. She doesn't know who I am. She doesn't care who you are." "I'm not doing this," I screamed. He looked at me with a terrifying finality. "Then don't. But don't come back to the house. The locks have already been changed. The cards are canceled. You have $20 in your pocket. Choose." The car door slammed. He drove away. I stood on the cracked sidewalk in my $2,000 boots, holding a gray jumpsuit, surrounded by strangers who looked at me like a ghost. Beatrice was a woman made of iron and bad coffee. She looked at my manicured nails and spat on the floor. "You're late, 402, she barked. "Get in the sorting line. If you break a machine, I dock your pay. If you complain, you're fired. Clear?" I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream that my father owned the very ground she stood on. But I looked at the gate and realized I had nowhere to go. For 10 hours, I stood on a concrete floor that vibrated with the roar of heavy machinery. My job was to sort industrial scrap, sharp metal, heavy plastics, oily residue. By noon, my back felt like it was being poked with hot needles. By 3 p.m., my hands, the hands I used to get massaged weekly, were bleeding through the cheap gloves. I watched the woman next to me. She was older, maybe 60. She moved with a rhythmic, tireless grace. "How do you do this?" I hissed, my voice cracking. She didn't look up. "Because my daughter needs a coat for winter, and the rent doesn't pay itself. Keep moving, girlie. You're falling behind." I realized then that for these people, work wasn't a choice or a lifestyle. It was survival. Every piece of metal I sorted was a mouthful of food. Every hour I stood there was another hour of heat in a cold apartment. A week passed, then 2. I lived in a tiny, cramped room my father had arranged, a studio with a leaking faucet and a bed that smelled like old dust. I ate canned soup. I walked to the warehouse because I couldn't afford a taxi. One night, I sat on the floor of that tiny room and looked at my reflection in a cracked mirror. My skin was dull. There was grease under my nails that wouldn't come out. I looked human, not a doll, not a princess, just a person. I felt a surge of hot, bubbling rage. Rage at my father for being so cruel. Rage at the world for being so hard. But then the rage turned. It turned inward. I remembered the fruit sellers I used to drive past in my convertible. I remembered the waiters I never thanked. I remembered the janitors I never looked in the eye. I had lived 22 years as a parasite, consuming everything and producing nothing. The next morning, I didn't wait for the alarm. I woke up at 4:30 a.m. I put on my stained jumpsuit. I tied my hair back. I walked into the warehouse and went straight to Beatrice. "I'm done with the sorting line," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "Quitting already? Figures." "No," I said, my voice steady. "I want to learn the inventory system. I saw the boys in the back struggling with the logs. It's inefficient. I can fix it." Beatrice looked at me for a long time. She saw the blisters on my hands. She saw the lack of fear in my eyes. "Go on then," she grunted. "Prove it." 6 months later, the warehouse was running at 20% higher efficiency. I hadn't just fixed the logs, I had redesigned the entire workflow. I knew every worker by name. I knew whose kid was sick and who was struggling with debt. I wasn't employee 402 anymore. I was Ilara. One evening, a black sedan pulled up to the loading dock. My father stepped out. He looked older. He looked proud. "The lesson is over," he said, holding the door open. "The house is waiting. Your accounts are restored. You can come home now." I looked at the warehouse. I looked at Beatrice, who was nodding at me from the office window. I looked at my hands, scarred, strong, and capable. "I'm not coming home, Dad," I said. He froze. "What do you mean? You've proven your point. You've learned the value of $1. "No," I replied, stepping toward him. "You taught me the value of work, but I'm not going back to being a bird in a velvet cage. I don't want the money you give me. I want the money I earn." I handed him a folder. "These are my proposals for the Vance Logistics branch. I've identified 3 major leaks in your supply chain that I found while working on the floor. I'll take the job as junior manager at the standard starting salary, not a penny more." My father looked at the folder, then at me. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. "When do you start?" "Tomorrow," I said. "I have a shift to finish here first." As his car drove away, I didn't feel the need for diamonds or champagne. I felt the weight of the key in my pocket, the key to a life I had built with my own hands. The glass world had shattered, and finally, for the first time, I could breathe. Did this story change the way you look at your own easy life? Success isn't what you're given, it's what you build when you have nothing left to lose. Don't forget to subscribe for more interesting stories like this. See you in the next one.